Sorry. So, my name is Kathy, and I'm really excited to see so many faces, especially new faces. It's really amazing to see this group gaining strength. So thanks for coming to Addison Allies. This conversation, mostly Veronica, or entirely Veronica, put her energy forth to bring Robert Appel, who's a former leader in the Human Rights Commission and has done a lot of work with civil rights. He is a large name in our state of Vermont in terms of working with people who have a lot of power in these arenas. So we're really excited to have him come and speak to us and answer whatever questions that you might have when it comes to things around knowing your rights as you work with undocumented people. So if you have any questions, certainly feel free, I would say, at any time to interrupt Robert. And I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit more. But I just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for showing up.
Is my mic on? Are you able to hear me? Yeah. Great. Okay. I don't like hiding behind the podium. I'd rather be out front talking to you all. So I've taken to calling myself a has-been as opposed to a never was. So I have had a long career in law in Vermont. I'm an unusual lawyer. I became a lawyer without going to law school. I read law. I was an investigator in the Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, where I did most of it. My mentor was a woman named Denise Johnson, who ended up on our Supreme Court. And I got admitted in '84. I was a public defender in St. Johnsbury, where I met Veronica, where my public defender partner was a dear friend of Veronica's, then known as Ronnie. I went back to work in public defense after I got admitted in 1984. I worked as a correctional defender, a public defender at St. J. Then I was hired as a director of the Civil Rights Division in the Attorney General's office. In 1993, Howard Dean made the mistake of appointing me to be Defender General, which is the head public defender's. I was in the AG's office. He thought he was getting a prosecutor. I'm not a prosecutor. Most of my heart and soul has been in criminal defense. And to me, criminal defense and civil rights enforcement are the two sides of the same coin. So I worked as Defender General for 8 years, running the public defender system statewide. Then I was hired as the executive director of the Human Rights Commission. And during that time, I worked with Cheryl and others here in something that was then called the Addison County Farm Workers Coalition, which I think was the predecessor of what your organization is now. And I have done presentations over the time around how to conduct yourselves as allies to people without documentation, how to try to influence policymakers in your communities, on the state level, and increasingly more difficult on a national level. This is a difficult conversation to have in this time because the landscape is shifting so quickly. There are so many unknowns. As we all know, the person occupying the White House has a particular view of the issues regarding immigration, and in my view, people who are brown-skinned or dark-skinned or don't look like me, white males. So it's hard to predict what happens going forward. I do better in answering your questions. I can talk a little bit, and I know a little bit about your organization. I know you've done some work in trying to influence local police departments regarding their adoption of what is now a required fair and impartial policing policy. That took some, I think, 3 different legislative acts to make that statewide and require each department, including state police, I think was in 2010, local police like Middlebury Police Department, where you have Chief Hanley here, is pretty good. Tom Hanley talks about being from an immigrant family and has spoken often and is a leader, in my view, in the municipal policing area in holding to the don't ask, don't tell mantra. And then there's the locals. You have sheriffs. I don't know your sheriff here anymore. I knew Sheriff Coons a little bit, but he passed. I don't know who you have now. Somebody can tell me. Who's your sheriff, if you know?
Peter Newton.
I'm sorry?
Peter Newton.
Newton. Okay, I met him once. Has he been in a problem? No,
I don't know.
not yet.
He's new, so
He's new, but
he was a decade.
he was a deputy, a long-time deputy. I know, was it Jim Coons? He had been sheriff many years, as I recall. And then you have locals like George Merkel in Virginia, and I get a lot of noise about Chief Merkel. I don't know if that's your experience. Mostly about people who are dark-skinned, African Americans. Some of the work I was involved with early on was pushing police departments to collect motor vehicle race data, you know, who they're stopping, and the outcome of each stop. So, and the data has been pretty clear that police overstop brown-skinned individuals, brown and black, and overreact. They conduct more searches, they issue harsher sanctions, meaning tickets instead of warnings, more searches, either consent searches or warrant searches, and I can talk a little bit about consent versus warrant. And they find less contraband. And I was involved in a voluntary effort in Chittenden County in the mid-aughts. Kind of funny to be talking about aughts at this point, but 04, 05, there was a community activists who came together and pulled in Burlington Police Department, South Burlington Police Department, UVM, who was in and out, and Winooski. And Winooski, as you probably know, traditionally has been one of our most diverse communities. I think whites are now a majority population in Winooski, but a minority in the schools. They speak something like 40 languages there. So, you know, Vermont has changed a whole lot. I came here in 1971. I lived in a little town called Woodbury, which is next to Cabot, and I didn't see a person of color for months at a time. But I now live in Chittenden County, and it's a very different environment. And I see many of you who've been around a while and would echo that. You have your hand up. Did you? No. Yeah, no, you're just waiting. So the voluntary effort with those 4 agencies spawned a legislative response, but like I say, over time, prompted a requirement that all departments collect motor vehicle race data and adopt and hopefully implement a fair and impartial policing practice policy. And what that means is, particularly in the context of this discussion, that you cannot discriminate based on race, color, and immigration status. There was a very large and long debate as to whether the model policy state police put out, and eventually the Vermont Criminal Justice Training Council, are people familiar with that organization? No. In order to become a law enforcement officer in the state, you have to go to an 18-week training program in, it's going to come back to me. It's not Brandon, it's the next town. Pittsburgh. Thank you. The former tuberculosis sanatorium, interestingly enough. And they do put out model policies with input. Traditionally, that organization has been very heavily dominated by law enforcement agencies, corrections, federal law enforcement agencies. But things are starting to shift a little bit, and communities having more impact on how that council functions. So things are slowly changing, not as quickly as our demographics are changing, but changing. So with regard to immigration issues, this is a couple of colonels ago. Colonel is the highest ranking officer in the state police. There was a man named James Baker who was from, actually, roughly a little south of here. He took the position, you all know what particular consul are? Yes, no, maybe. I'll talk a little bit about that. There's been visits here by the Mexican consulate. They come twice a year. Traditionally, Addison County, and they've been doing Montpelier this year. They've been in Goddard and Plainfield. And what they do is work with Mexican nationals who are here with or without legal status to get what is called a matricula consular, which is a Mexican government-issued ID that verifies the person says who she or he is, and that there are no outstanding warrants in Mexico, meaning they're not wanted. And when the Mexican consulate started that process, Colonel Baker was quoted as saying, they're as useful as a library card for identification. He really totally disregarded the efforts the Mexican government was doing to assist their folks who have come here to work, to do the work, as we all know, that locals don't really want to do. It's pretty clear to me that without that labor force, the number of farms would be dropping even more quick, dairy farms in particular, would be dropping even more quickly than it is. My understanding is, as recently as probably 30 years ago, there were 3,000, now it's about 700. And it dropped from 800 to 700. I mean, the price of milk is a whole other problem. And I don't know if many of you or any of you are farmers here, but I'm not telling you anything you don't know. It's a very hard slog. For people from Central America and Mexico, the opportunity to come here and make a moderate wage in our society is a windfall in their society. So traditionally they have been coming and coming. Because of the change in the national policy, because of some changes in the Mexican economy, I understand the flow is slowing, but Vermont's dairy industry and other industries as well rely heavily on this labor force. So there have been accommodations made over time. I came here, well, it was probably in this room about 10 years ago. The next colonel of the state police was a man named Tom Lesperance, who engaged with the Mexican consular staff on a presentation in this room about how they go around issuing these matricula consular and how the Mexican government ensures the security of the card. I don't know the technical details, but it's embedded. It's very hard to duplicate. You can't forge them. They're pretty darn good at identification. So that started to shift the approach that law enforcement traditionally wants to know who they're dealing with. And with good reason. I mean, if you issue a citation to appear in court, or if you have concerns about public safety, the first thing they do is check to see if they're wanted. Do you have outstanding warrants from another jurisdiction or in Vermont? So, in Vermont, about 20 years ago, made it a requirement that if you're engaging with a law enforcement officer, you have to identify yourself. This came out of UVM students making up ridiculous names when they were cited for underage drinking and public nuisance crime. So for officer safety, for public safety, the officers, in my view, have a legitimate need to know who they're dealing with. Are they mass murderers who are wanted in another jurisdiction, or are they people here trying to make a living? So things have progressed where the matricula consular is deemed by law enforcement to be valid identification. They can run it to see, when I say run it, there are so many databases now about outstanding warrants, their immigration status, this, that, and the other thing. And in fact, some of you know that there's been protests in front of the ICE building in Williston the last 2 summers. And that's the home not only of the National Call Center, the slogan, if you see something, call someone, which is how Mexican farm workers got picked up in Newport at Walmart. Somebody called because they looked out of place. 20 years ago, that happened in this town. Brown-skinned farm workers would come to the market in town, and the police would be called because they looked out of place. Again, that's changing, but it still happens. There's still, and of course, with the Trump rhetoric and the politics of the day, there are certainly members of our community who think that people who don't look like me don't belong here. You don't look like Vermonters. I'm afraid that's still a strong belief among some individuals. The other thing I would say is, in large measure, thanks to Senator Leahy and his position on Senate appropriations, he's been our senator since 1974, we have a large presence of immigration and customs enforcement agencies in Franklin and Chittenden County. So there's a lot of people who work for ICE who have a belief that the work they're doing is critical to enforce the law and deal with people who are not here properly. So, where does that leave you on a local level? Scrambling to do what you can to support the humanity and the struggles of people who come here. Well, all they want to do, in my view, is make a decent living, send money home, support their families, and by and large stay out of trouble. And I know that this organization and its predecessor has done a lot of work in that area. So with that much of an introduction, and unless somebody wants me to ramble on about something else, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have or talk about the risks you have in terms of assisting this population or any other questions. We'll start over here.
Just like super, I'm new to the organization, so super basic questions if you don't mind. So I'm driving a nice fellow from his English lessons to his farm.
Yes.
And I don't know his immigration status. Would never ask him.
Good.
But you know, people say to me, "Oh, is he legal?" I'm like, "Oh, cool. Of course I don't ask him that." So I've sort of two questions. One is, should I be aware of his immigration status for any reason? And number two is, could you talk us through what a traffic stop might look like?
Absolutely.
Can you repeat the question or something?
Sure. Okay, the question is, this woman assists persons from Mexico or Central America. We have a lot of Guatemalan and Mexicans primarily working farms. And the question was, should she be inquiring about the person she's transporting's legal status? Are they here legally? Are they overstayed a visa? Have they applied for asylum? Or are they out of status? So, the mantra, don't ask, don't tell, I would say applies to you as well. There's no reason for you to know. There's no benefit to you knowing. And there's a risk. We haven't seen this yet here, but in Arizona, federal authorities have prosecuted people for assisting people who have crossed illegally, and they're charging folks just like you, who out of the goodness of their heart, assist people not dying in the desert when they come across, leaving water, giving them shelter. That becomes aiding and abetting. It's now, as I understand it, a criminal offense to cross in without report, without status. We've not seen that here. Those are brought by federal authorities, meaning the U.S. Attorney. Our U.S. Attorney here is relatively new. I don't know her personally. I had my doubts that she would want to be prosecuting those cases. However, with who's in charge in D.C., who's head of Homeland Security, who our Attorney General is, I'll say the United States Attorney General, because Bill Barr is not my Attorney General. It's uncertain. So the less you know, the better. And I have done presentations over the years, and I actually did a pamphlet that I presented several times. It's probably still kicking around. It was called No Fuzzy Dice. Fuzzy dice, meaning, you know, those doll things that you get at the fair, and you hang it from your rearview mirror. Well, it's against the law to have an obstructed windshield in the state. So police use, if they're curious about what's going on, they'll use any viable violation of any law to pull you over. So, My advice is in transporting, and this is for everybody, make sure your car is full of gas, inspect it, all the lights work, you drive the speed limit, you use turn signals, at a stop sign, you stop, you count to 3, and then you proceed. So you don't want to invite that inquiry. In law enforcement, it's a long-standing occurrence. I have a friend who was the first black trooper in the state. He calls it black and white. No, but salt and pepper. That's what they were taught in his day as being suspicious. So if you have a white driver and a brown or black passenger, that was suspicious. I mean, it's sort of how the notion of racial profiling got started. And I have a case like that that's in the federal courts now where, the lore here is that black men come from inner cities, they bring contraband, they shack up with white women, and they deal. It happens, but that doesn't mean every biracial couple in a car, don't have to be couples, just occupants, are engaged in illegal activities. So that mindset is still out there, particularly with older officers. There's pluses and minuses. State police have a mandatory retirement. At 55, you gotta go. The municipals don't. And things are changing over time. The training, the orientation, the police culture in the state is improving. But there are still some holdovers. So my advice in that regard is don't make unnecessary stops. Like I say, have gas. Drive the speed limit, obey all traffic laws, give them no reason to stop you. However, when stopped, and I see some people who don't look like me in the room, I've seen these cases over and over again, and I haven't seen one in a while, where it's a white driver, somebody like you, who's transporting somebody who is not white, who may be from another country. I had one with Grand Isle Sheriff. Had one on the interstate in Montpelier. That was in Middlesex. The driver was going 86 on the interstate. It's a violation, obviously. You get stopped. Driving farm worker to a meeting, and the officer, the trooper, immediately after getting the ID on the driver, turns to the passenger and says something like, "Do you belong here?" Now, the passenger has no obligation to respond to that, and is best not saying anything other than providing a name. The law in the state is better than the federal courts. The federal courts have said that if you're a passenger in a vehicle and the officer asks you to get out, you have to get out. Under Vermont decisional law, meaning a Vermont Supreme Court case, an officer cannot order an occupant out of the vehicle without what's known as articulable suspicion of that individual engaging in criminal activity. So the fact that you're sitting in a car with a driver who violated the speed limit, civil ticket, doesn't give rise to any objective evidence that the passenger is engaging in criminal activity, and therefore the officer really has no right to get anything other than a name. And if the name checks out, and there's no outstanding warrants, that should be the end of it. So again, in my view, there's no reason for you to know immigration status. And the policy now says, unless there's a particular legitimate criminal investigative requirement, they're not asking for identification. They're not asking for legal status. Identification, yes. Legal status, no. So the matricular consular is a great tool. So if someone without legal status produces that, police now are obligated to respect it, and if it comes back clear, that should be the end of it. Not always. Oftentimes, particularly up north in Franklin County, and this happened in that Grand Isle case, the officer doesn't speak Spanish, so who do they call for an interpreter? Border Patrol. There are many Border Patrol agents in the state who are Latino. I don't know if any of you have been stopped on roadblocks. They tend to be brown skinned. the ICE protests at the end of July, the head of, this was Federal Protective Services for Homeland Security, was a Latino man. So, I don't quite understand that, but there are other resources in the community, including a telephonic interpretation service, where you don't have to call Border Patrol to provide language interpretation. Did I answer your question? I didn't ramble a bit,
Yes,
but...
can you just, how do you get language interpretation?
Well,
If
there's,
you don't, if
there's
you just
something...
refer to,
All right. There are national services, and the police should have access to them. Of course, cell service in the state is still spotty, but there are services that you can dial where you're going to get a bilingual person who can translate from English to the language of the, for lack of a better word, suspect, and then translate the suspect's language back to the officer. It's not as good as person to person, but it's better than calling Border Patrol, who have a totally different agenda. It's called Language Line, and I believe most departments have access. And if they don't, they should. Again, there's this interesting provision in the Vermont Constitution that says all officers are to be held accountable to the populace. And I was at a forum the other night in Jericho where our T.J. Donovan, our Attorney General, spoke, and a woman named Ingrid Jonas, who was the head of the Community Relations and Fair and Impartial, she's a captain at the time, program. She's now a major, there's 4 majors. I didn't think I'd live long enough to see a female rise to that level. The first 2 female officers got driven out by ridiculous sexist behavior, and that's 30 years ago. So I take my hats off to the state police. They were trying, they were making improvement, and they did great. And she said, there's no reason for us to know. And that, you know, I think they provide leadership, but they have no authority to influence locals. It's really by modeling. And like I say, it took the legislature 3 times to get the fair and impartial policing policy required and data collection required and implemented. So that data should be available to you. It should be available to you online. It's supposed to make it publicly accessible. So all departments are answerable to us folks. That's the bottom line. That's what Major Jones said the other night. If we don't have, and that's what finally, okay, so I told you about Jim Baker saying that particularly the consular was like a library card. What turned him over was, again, this is probably 15 years ago, Van Dyke, there was a band of ne'er-do-wells who on payday would go out to farms and pistol whip farm workers and take their money. And of course, the farm workers were too intimidated to call the police, which is why they made a perfect victim. Police don't want that. We don't want that. As members of the community, if we want public safety, we want, and this is what Major Jones said the other night, I couldn't agree more, and that's really what shifted the conversation. If we want public safety, if we want peace in our communities, we have to build the trust between the police and the community. So where there is a need for police services, citizens feel safe enough to call and know they're not going to be in the hands of Border Patrol. With that fear, these gangs are going to continue to, like I say, they're a perfect target. They're not in a position to report. So, bit by bit. Other questions? I saw other hand when we were doing this. I saw somebody, Cheryl had her hand up, and then we'll work this way.
So when people go to apply for their driver's privilege card,
Yes.
some people were getting, it sounded as if it was, for a while, individuals were taking it upon themselves to turn them over to ICE, and even though it's not legal. And I'm wondering if that situation has been cleaned up yet, or if we still need to be careful when people are, say, going up to Burlington to take care.
I'm afraid it still happens.
and his DMV employees. There was a ACLU brought a lawsuit on behalf of an individual of Middle Eastern ancestry, I forget the man's name, to prevent that. He had no legal status, but he was applying for a driver privilege card, and they called immigration. ACLU was successful in bringing that suit. I believe that the legislature has now prohibited that act, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. For many, well, I'm more familiar with the Montpelier Motor Vehicle Department, which I've dealt with for 40 years, pushing 50. Most clerks, I mean, when you renew your license, first thing they do is check your record. Do you have an outstanding warrant? If you do, they call the Montpelier Police Department. Police come, put you in handcuffs, and takes you to jail till you clear the warrant. So that mindset's still there. Everyone's aware of what a driver's privilege card is, more or less? No. Okay. This was about a decade ago. Help me here, Cheryl. You were involved in this. The community, this is basically microjustice among sort of providing the leadership. Their structure is they convene meetings of the affected community. People without documentation who work on farms, and to their credit, they take leadership from that population. And what the workers said is, we're extremely isolated. You know this part, right? Extremely isolated. We can't visit our friends or family. We can't go out and shop. We're stuck on the farm. And in Franklin County, farmers try to keep them inside because if they step outside, Border Patrol runs the back roads, including cornfields and jeeps, looking for people who don't look like them. So sort of, some farmers have this paternalistic view that we want to keep them safe, but it's their choice. You know, I'm a big believer in individual self-determination. If they want to expose themselves to registering as someone who can't get a regular license is valid for, well, they've now gone to enhance, but for federal identification and travel through Transportation Security Administration, so you can get on an airplane. I carry a driver's privilege card in solidarity. I want to dilute the notion that everybody who has a driver's privilege card is without documentation. Because the thought for law enforcement is if you're brown-skinned and you have a privilege card, you're probably out of status. It doesn't fly under articulable suspicion under the constitutional requirement, but it happens. So, and there was a big debate, mostly around allies, I think, as to whether this is a good idea. Because what it does, DMV now has a list of people who have driver's privilege cards. And if you're an officer, either Border Patrol or state or local, who have it out for people without legal status, it's a register. So it was quite controversial when it passed. I have not followed the data, but there is some risk in that. On the other hand, there's more risk in driving without a license without insurance. So again, in terms of promoting public safety, to me it makes sense. You had a question?
Just a fine point of law,
Use the mic, so you can hear.
just a fine point of law, you use the word criminal a lot. I wonder if you go into that just a little bit, because of course there are misdemeanors and other kinds of things.
Good question. Great question. Okay, the Constitution only, the prohibition against search and seizure only applies in the criminal context. So a speeding ticket's civil, unless you're over 30 miles over, and it becomes negligent operation and criminal offense. So civil matters, the courts are not as protective of individual rights as they are on the criminal side. So the Constitution, and I should have said this at the beginning, although Trump has another view, the Constitution applies to any person in the United States, citizen or not. It covers all persons. So on the criminal side, a person without status has constitutional rights against unreasonable search and seizure, You know, they have a right to remain silent. They have a right to a lawyer if they get charged with a criminal offense and can't afford one. So the constitutional provisions on the criminal side apply to all persons. On the civil side, it's way more relaxed. And it's very hard to get a judge to engage that same analysis on the civil side. The DMV is now on a campaign to check on, there's something like 1,200 drivers in the state who are on what they call provisional licenses because they lost their license for life because of alcohol use. 3 or more DUIs, you lose it for life until you show 3 years of abstinence. You get a provisional license. So now they're banging on doors and seeing if people are drinking. I have a case like that. I don't think I can argue search and seizure. Guy let him in, and one guy, there's just a rash of them. So the Constitution doesn't protect on that side. The other thing I should say about driving is it's not a right, it's a privilege. That's why it says driver's privilege. You have a right to vote if you're a citizen. You have a right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure. You don't have a right to drive. Oddly enough. Of course, try living in rural Vermont without driving. We all know better. So thank you for the question. This woman here in the pink, please. I think that was you. You had your hand up, right? Yeah.
I'm thinking about getting pulled over with someone in the car with me.
I hope not.
I do too. Sometimes it'll be obvious who the person is pulling me over.
Yes.
State trooper's vehicle, their uniform, the same with the county sheriff, maybe the Middlebury police.
Right.
Is that going to be true for everybody that might pull a car over? Border Patrol, do they wear a uniform? I guess what I'm getting at is, do I have the right to ask them for identification?
Police are now trained to identify themselves upon a stop and hopefully state a reason for the stop. And I think you have an absolute right to say, officer, can you identify by department and name and the reason for the stop?
And would that be the first thing to do if they haven't done it preemptively?
I would. Of course, I would. Of course, that sets up a confrontational relationship. Any of you familiar with the Sandra Bland case in Texas? Mm-hmm. A woman that ended up getting into a very black woman. Cop didn't like that she was smoking, told her to put a cigarette out, escalated. He took her in, she's dead 3 days later by, they say, suicide in the jail cell, who knows? That's the risk you take. I mean, officers should be trained and should be weeded out if they can't do the job. And to me, doing the job is being respectful and polite and identifying themselves, the agency, and the reason for the stop. Should that not happen, I think you should report it up the chain. There is something about a paramilitary organization. The chain of command works. So it's really on us as community members. Again, we pay the police. They work in our direction. Everyone's accountable to somebody. We fund them. Tom Hanley was hired presumably by the select board, or the town manager here. The town manager's hired by the select board. You know, if Middlebury officers are not engaging in that practice, you have every right to go up and say, I felt disrespected, the officer got huffy with me for no reason, etc., etc. So, was that the complete answer to your question? Okay. Let's go over here. We haven't been over here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thanks. This is kind of a long-winded question, I guess, but maybe some of you might be familiar with the viral video from last summer that showed a white man driving two undocumented immigrants from a port back to their farm. They were stopped by ICE.
Here?
But, no, in New York. They were stopped by ICE, but because they didn't have a warrant signed by a judge and the driver knew that, he articulated that and it made it a stop. One, is that that the right thing to do if we're stopped by, say, the police and not Border Patrol, or is it better to be less confrontational, like with the last question? And two, if you can clearly see that they're doing something that's not articulable suspicion,
Right.
is saying that out loud a good idea, or maybe doing more harm than good?
Great question. You raised a number of interesting points in it. And I should have said, when you mentioned it, do you know who's stopping you? Border Patrol has a 100-mile jurisdiction from any international port of entry. So that's about 3/4 of Vermont, down somewhere northern Bennington County, Wyndham County. I don't know, in the news, there's been an effort to roll that back. I think Phil Scott actually said he'd like to see it 5 or 10 miles. So whether that will happen, that's a national question. And the national discussion on these issues is certainly not immigrant-friendly these days. So, and might you see somebody not in uniform stopping? Yeah. There are plainclothes detectives, most troopers, and then there are Bureau of Criminal Investigation are plainclothes. And if they think you're transporting somebody without stating a warrant, it might be a plainclothes guard, a plainclothes trooper, officer in an unmarked car. But yeah, you have a right to ask. So back to your question. Well, there's two kinds of warrants, which you probably got from the video. I've not seen the video, I've been hearing about it. There's an administrative warrant from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is not as powerful and should not be respected as opposed to a warrant issued by a judge. So judicial warrants are issued for people who don't appear in court when they're supposed to. That's basically it. You know, absconding from court, not appearing. I'm trying to think of any other judicial, well, a judicial warrant based on in order to get a search warrant under the Constitution, that's issued by a judge, and that's based on, back to articulable suspicion. I should talk a little bit about that phrase, which is understood to be a set of objective facts by which a reasonable person would infer that criminal activity may be afoot. I don't know if that's helpful or not. That's about as specific as I can get. So another judicial warrant would be, let's say, we've had these cases. Officer stops somebody for speeding and thinks he's carrying drugs. Asks 4 times for consent to search. The operator has the absolute right not to consent. This is a tragic case. The officer didn't like the answer, and I guess he radioed into a supervisor. Another car rolls up, another cruiser. A sergeant comes out, he was a trooper, comes out and says, tell them the officer had written him for speeding, trooper wrote him for speeding, and said, okay, you can go. And then the second, the higher ranking officer came and said, no, we want to get a canine sniff for drugs. And oddly enough, a dog sniff is not a search under our case law, because you have no expectation of privacy. You're going to be outside of your view. So the kid takes off, high-speed chase. He ends up approaching a spike strip, loses control of the car, gets up in the air and kills a cop. He's doing, what's he doing? 26 to 33. Long stretch. Anyway, the Supreme Court, in 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court actually issued a good decision that says, once the initial purpose of the stop is completed, meaning you write the ticket, absent, again, articulable suspicion, objective evidence that this individual was carrying a contraband, which he was, but the cop didn't know it. At the end of writing the ticket, that's the end. You gotta let him go. So, So if you decline consent and they impound the car, which they can do, they go and apply for a search warrant from a judge, and the judge reviews the application and makes an independent determination whether there's sufficient grounds to believe that a criminal violation occurred. And then then they can issue a warrant for arrest based on that probable cause, based on the finding of contraband, based on the search warrant. I mean, it's kind of attenuated, but that's my answer. I think there was another part to your question which I may have lost.
Okay.
But if not, we'll move on.
I guess I just want to clarify. So in this example, you're talking about a person with contraband.
Yeah.
And I guess to apply to us, that would be a driver with a potentially undocumented immigrant.
Well, that's not against the law.
No, it's not. But after they have written the ticket for whatever the infraction is, or whatever they perceive the infraction to be, that's the point at which we say, am I free to go or am I being detained?
Exactly.
And if they say yes, then we say, what's your articulable suspicion? Or do we say...
Just say, what am I being charged with?
What am I being charged with? Okay.
Issue me the citation. Citation is a date to appear in court. And just to be clear, it's not police who charge you. They make a report, an investigative report, and they cite a law they believe was violated. In this state, it's called an information. And then a state's attorney, who again is a locally elected official, Dennis Wigman's here now, they make an independent determination as to whether they believe the officer's affidavit supports the charge that the officer's recommending, a higher charge, a lower charge, or no charge.
Okay.
And then you still don't have to answer guilty or not guilty on the day you show up in court for what's known as an arraignment, an initial appearance, until the judge has reviewed it and found probable cause. That each element of the offense is spoken to in the affidavit. And as defense counsel at arraignment, I can make a challenge saying, no, the weight of the contraband, when marijuana was an ounce, it's now illegal, but over an ounce was criminal. So you can challenge the weight, for example. And that's an element the state has to prove to get a person. Generally, that's going to be litigated after the fact, but sometimes a judge will throw it out because the cop overcharged, prosecutor overcharged. So there are a number of checks and balances.
Got it. And just a follow-up to that, you say, I would say issue me a citation. Can they issue my passenger a citation, even if that's not the initial reason for being pulled over?
Only if, by law, they have developed articulable suspicion of criminal activity by your passenger.
And I could dispute that with the judge when I go to court.
Right, so if your passenger is,
just sitting there.
well, let's say your passenger has is a woman and has a compact mirror with a line of cocaine on it, sitting on her lap. All right, that's articulable suspicion of criminal activity, right?
Sure.
So, pretty obvious.
I just got a guy sitting next to me showing his matricula consular.
No,
That's,
no.
yeah,
As
that's
long
not
as
articulable suspicion.
Not in my book.
Does he have to show that?
You're better off showing it, because again, if you don't identify yourself to the officer's satisfaction, they can keep digging. So the particular consular and the respect that's gathered over the last 20 years by law enforcement in the state is critical in my view. Because if you give a false name or you refuse to identify yourself, A, it pisses the cop off, and B, it justifies further investigation on their part. I mean, it raises suspicion, whether legitimate or not, it raises suspicion. So if you have good ID and you have no outstanding warrant, show them the ID. Border Patrols have all the can of worms. They have immense power. If you're out of status, you're out of status, and they have databases that demonstrate that.
So can we just restate? I think we should restate what, my understanding of what you just said. So there's a car, and there's a couple of guys in the car with Patricia. And the car is pulled over by a as local police officer.
Yeah.
The police officer, and Patricia was, maybe she was, I don't know, not speeding. There was,
Failed to signal a turn.
failed to signal a
Roll
turn.
to a stop sign.
So, but I don't think there will be anything like that. No, this is a stop in the case that there was no, it's just an odd stop. You don't know why you were stopped. So the cop has to say why he stopped you, or she
You have
stopped
a
you.
right to ask, and the officer should respond.
Okay, and
Whether
then,
they do or not is another question.
so that's one thing, they don't have to. And then following the video, then say the officer says, show me some identification, I want the identification of your passenger. So the passenger needs, is a good idea or has to show identification to the officer?
I think it's a good idea, because if not, the officer's suspicion will be raised and will likely not be satisfied till they know your passenger is not a mass murderer wanted in Massachusetts, for example.
Then,
So a better example than the compact with the cocaine is an open bottle opener.
right, which could happen, but
Which
so
could
then, I think, because the concern among this group, I think, is with lawful transportation of someone, what rights do the officers have, and what rights do they not have? What rights do we have, and what rights do our passengers have? And I think that's, Veronica, is that?
So let me try to restate. As the operator, you have in my view, a right to respectful interaction with the officer. You have a right to ask the officer's name, agency, and reason for the stop. If the officer wants to write you a ticket or issue a citation for some criminal offense, be cooperative. The law is very clear in this state and many other states that you have no right to resist an unlawful arrest, even if the cops wildly overreacting to a situation and violating constitutional rights. The place to have that argument is not on the roadside, but in the courthouse. I mean, the cops don't want to do that, and I suggest you don't want to do it. Because the cops have guns and a lot of power and a lot of people coming behind them. So my advice always is be cooperative, say nothing more than you have to, which is the officer should ask for a license, registration, proof of identification, all of which are required by law. If you hand that over, they will go back to their vehicle. How many people have had this happen? They'll run your name, see if there's anything outstanding, they'll check your criminal history. If you're under suspension, let's say you have 4 speeding tickets of 3 points each in the last year. So you're under suspension. We changed the law now, so it's simple. First 5 times, because we used to have all these driving license suspended cases in court. But no regular ticket, it's a civil ticket. If you're under, because of a DUI, that's criminal. They'll issue a citation to show up in court, and they won't let you drive off because you don't have the privilege of driving. Your legal privilege has been revoked. So that's you. And once that's done, you have a right to leave. Okay? And if you're under suspension, you have a right to call somebody. They like towing cars, because then they can attempt an impound. And it gets very pricey to have a car impounded. There's the tow charge and storage charge. So that's you. When it's done, it's done. Okay? The name of the case is U.S. versus Rodriguez. Cops should know that case because they should be trained on it because it's the law of the land. There were some cases in Vermont that hinted at that as far back as 03, but from 2015 on, it's crystal clear. When you're done, you're done. The passenger, I believe it's best that if you have ID, to present the ID, and absent the officer having, again, some objective evidence of criminal conduct. And again, we're not talking about immigration violations with Vermont officers. They're not interested at this point. That's what they say. My understanding, I believe, is still yet being here without status is not a crime. Crossing is. So it gets a little complex. But again, due to the work of you folks and others, Vermont law enforcement is no longer interested, and most law enforcement leaders will say, we have enough to do enforcing state law. Immigration is not us, it's a federal law, it's a federal agency, we enforce local laws. And the culture has shifted, at least rhetorically, and I'm not hearing otherwise, where the focus is, so both cases I talked about, the interstate stop in Middlesex with the guy going 83 and the one in Grand Isle, the cop, once seeing a person in the passenger seat who's brown-skinned, who doesn't speak English, immediately forgot about the driver and started interrogating the individual. Both of them ending up paying damages to the individual because they had no reason to do that. And I think that was a shot across the bow of law enforcement saying, you can't do that. You know, they weren't big money cases, but neither were litigated, they were settled with the Human Rights Commission. So that word gets back. It's a relatively small community. There's 3,000 officers. And the executives are even smaller. So that word gets back, and Rodriguez, the case I was talking about from the feds, if they violate that, it gives rise to what's known as the 1983 action, a violation of a constitutional right by a state actor. And that's money damages and bad publicity for the department. So, your passenger, again, I would say, identify yourself, volunteer no information. You have an absolute right not to do anything more than identify yourself. You have an absolute right as a driver to do nothing more than give the paperwork. You don't have to answer where you're coming from, where you're going, have you had anything to drink. Once you go down that road, then the cop is going to say, well, you say you had a glass of wine with them. Next thing they know, they're going to have you out of the car, walking the line, and you never pass that. I'm telling you, the roads, the field sobriety test, you never pass. It's like, don't do it. It's unclear whether they can compel that. The breathalyzer is another one, it's unclear. But if you get arrested and taken to the station, they want an evidentiary sample blown into the thing with the buzzer, you got to do that, you're going to lose your license for a refusal. That's the driver. And I think the less said, the better. Here's the paperwork, if you're going to write, you write. I don't argue with it. If it's a legitimate stop, they got me, they got me. I said, give me we'll see in court if we want to contest it. Roadside interaction should be as short and sweet as possible from your perspective. And hopefully the cop follows that lead. They don't like it, but you have an absolute right not to engage with them. Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. That's all I learned. Okay. Let's go here. We haven't heard from you.
Okay, so what if you're stopped by ICE and they're after your passengers?
Well, there's not much you can do, to my knowledge. You know, if they have determined that your passenger is out of status and you're within the 100-mile jurisdiction of Border Patrol, I think they have the lawful right to take your passenger into custody, and they will be detained. They may be bailed. Bail meaning you put cash money up to guarantee your appearance before an administrative judge in Boston in 4 years. The backlog's incredible. But I think it's harder and harder to get bail. You know, in Vermont, it's going the other way. Low-level offenses, because their jails are so overcrowded, misdemeanors, bail is an unusual event, cash bail. But Border Patrol's a whole other can of worms, and I don't really feel terribly well qualified. That's my impression. And one thing I should have said earlier, and I'll say it now and probably at the end. What I've given you today is my opinion. It's not particular legal advice. This is my knowledge, and I hope you understand it as such. If you have something pertaining to you that's individual and real, you should talk to me. I mean, I'm happy to talk to people individually after, but you're asking me to express my opinion on these issues. It's not legal advice. So thank you for understanding that. Yes, Aaron, then we'll go with the back.
Does ICE need to show a warrant signed by a judge?
I don't believe so. They say so that when they ran the name in their database, it showed the individual is who he or she says he or she is, but they're out of status, and therefore they're subject to a removal action.
That's only within 100 miles of the border.
Correct. Well, or any other port of entry. I grew up in Philadelphia, it's a port of entry. Airports are ports of entry. You know, Burlington Airport, if it's an international airport, it's a port of entry. Albany, whatever. Their powers are immense and broad ranging.
Has habeas corpus ever been used in immigration cases here in Vermont?
Not to my knowledge. Habeas corpus, for those not aware, having not gone to law school or grown up Latin, I'm not grown up Catholic, my Latin's lacking, but it's basically bring the body to me. You have a right to petition a judge to review why you're being detained. I don't know of it. And I'm not an immigration lawyer. I'm an interested citizen. My side is more the criminal. And I don't really feel qualified to answer, but not to my knowledge. Let's go here and then back to Charlotte. The gentleman in check shirt. Hand up.
So, just to be clear, if an ICE or a Border Patrol agent stops your car within 100 miles around a port of entry, and your passenger has one of these matricular consulari cars, can they still, but which only says that they are who they are, they don't have a criminal record?
In Mexico.
In Mexico,
right. They can run the name here through our databases.
Right.
And even if there's not an outstanding warrant, if the ICE Fusion Center, which is where the protest was on Harvest Drive in Williston, says they're out of legal status, they can be detained.
But what if they're, so if they are, if they don't have legal status, and
right,
they can still be detained. But any other law enforcement officer cannot detain them.
No, but they can call Border Patrol. And they used to do that.
But it has to be, so Border Patrol or ICE have to execute that prerogative.
Again, by policy, and I'm not sure it's codified in Vermont law at this point, Vermont police are not terribly interested in enforcing immigration. However, they will on occasion, and have on occasion, called Border Patrol, including getting an interpreter, which is to me insane. But hopefully there's been enough public pressure to move away from it. So does that answer your question?
I guess so, but there still is the possibility of transferring the case to Border Patrol or ICE.
It should not happen. It's a matter of public policy and legislative intent. It should not happen. Is there a legal remedy? Probably not. There was a big controversy. There's a federal law that prohibits states from enacting laws that prevent law enforcement officers, state and local, from reporting immigration information to ICE. So the Vermont way around that is don't ask. If you don't ask, you're not obligated to forward it, right? So that's how law enforcement in the state, reflecting the will of the majority of people here, and the legislative intent, has taken the policy of, we're not going to ask. So then we're not obligated to tell. You can't tell what you don't know. Back to the first question of the afternoon. Is that more of a complete, you're handing up the mic. I guess it was more of a complete answer.
Did you have something more that you wanted to ask?
No, he handed the mic.
Oh, okay. So,
Go ahead.
I see these, the stops on 89. So if you're on 89 with a person who you don't know if the person is documented or not, and you see one of these Border Patrol stops, you just have no choice but to just go through it? Is that?
You turn around.
You can. Okay, and can you,
Yeah, but you're on the interstate, you can't,
Well, I don't know if a border patrol officer is going to leave the post to chase you. They may call the state police. But for me, I do an illegal U-turn and I need to head off the interstate.
and is it better?
As quickly as I can. And, you know, the stop they had at Windsor for years, Windsor being 91 just south of 89 in White River. And Elaine's pretty good on this one. The data shows no terrorists, mostly young black and brown teenagers with marijuana. So if you're a terrorist, or if you're worried about that, take Route 5 in Vermont, take Route 10 in New Hampshire, and avoid it.
I have another question.
A word to the wise.
So I was talking to a man who's a farm worker in Bristol, and he said that he's been in Vermont for 19 years. He is undocumented. He just volunteered that. He was telling me his story. And he's told me that he was picked up by ICE. He was put in detention for 5.5 months and then went before a judge in Boston. And the judge said, what is your story? And he told the judge his story. He speaks perfect English. And told the judge that he has 3 children and that he's been here
all born.
all born here.
So if you're born here,
Yes,
like what
citizens.
Trump says, you're citizens.
Right.
Still in here.
And he told the judge that he supports these children and his wife, and he's been working consistently and paying taxes for 19 years, and the judge gave him a green card.
Hallelujah.
I'm sorry? Yeah, so I thought that was a great story, but then I also talked to...
Justice, hard to come by.
Right, I thought that was the best story, but then I talked to an immigration lawyer because I know that there is this thing where if an American citizen, and his children are the American citizens in this case, if American citizens are going to be disadvantaged by your being deported, there's it's reasonable to ask for
There's a hardship exception.
Exactly.
And judges, administrative law judges, have the authority to invoke it. It used to be that Homeland Security prosecutors could recommend it, but after Trump had done that, it was, the judge still has discretion, thank goodness. I mean, judges are supposed to be separate and apart from those who prosecute and enforce and exercise independent judgment. It's great when it happens. It doesn't happen all the time, it's great. That's their job.
Well, I talked to an immigration lawyer and I said, affirmatively, should people use that to affirmatively ask for, without having been in detention going before a judge, does it make any sense for a person to ask that affirmatively? And the immigration lawyer told me not right now in this climate.
Well, there's that. If you have nothing else, ask for mercy. That's or fundamental fairness, however you want to term it. You have a right to advance any defense you want. Well, you couldn't advance a necessity defense in the ICE protest. The state won't let us, the judge won't let us, but that's enough. Most of the time you can advocate for yourself. And you can always say, my circumstances are unusual. I've been here 19 years, I pay taxes, I got a family, whatever. So it's all information the judge is supposed to consider before rendering a decision and being just. And that's the theory, that's the design. Is that what happens every day? Maybe not.
So does it make sense to tell everyone who I know, who is here, who might not be documented, who has a child who was born here, does it make sense to suggest to that person that they see an immigration lawyer?
Yes.
Okay.
You want to marshal any and all facts are in your favor, whether it has a positive impact or not. You want to put your best foot forward. Ma'am, you had a question up here.
Yeah.
I'll try to repeat it if you don't have the mic.
Okay. Well, there are 2 parts. One is, so the police can't stop you just because they feel like stopping you. They have to be doing something. Can ICE stop a car?
Yes.
Or no, they can't?
Within 100 miles of the border, by mistake.
They can stop any car for any reason?
They do it at the checkpoints.
Okay.
So when that was going on, I was married at the time, I had 2 kids. We were in a town Chrysler van, we were all white. You know, I mean, it still happens, but if you're brown skinned, you go over there. It happens in airports,
Right.
where you have a Sikh turban or what, you know. Authority exercises discretion, often wrongly, but my understanding is Border Patrol has the authority to make random stops.
The other question is, if you're giving rides to people who might be undocumented,
Yeah.
are you at a disadvantage if you can't communicate with your passenger? Like if I were to do it and I don't speak Spanish and my passenger might not speak English, am I gonna make things worse if we're stopped?
No, I don't think so. I mean, hopefully, some of the work this organization does is to educate passengers how to behave. Not, you know, not to get mouthy, not to carry weapons, not to be engaging in, you know, not riding while having had beers, whatever, you know, because once in a car, you get a smell of alcohol, you know, I don't know if it's coming from the passenger or the driver. I open the window, oh, it smells like alcohol here. Next thing you know, the operator's going to be processed roadside for potential DUI or marijuana use, whatever, although, again, marijuana's now, pinch myself, legal.
I just wonder, so if your passenger is apprehended by ICE,
Yes.
what are the risks of having your car impounded? And what are the risks?
I would think virtually none.
Okay.
I would think. Unless you have knowledge that they were engaging in unlawful conduct, which can be imputed to you. There's this notion in the criminal law, that's what's known as constructive possession. So, if, for example, your passenger is carrying 2 ounces of marijuana, and it smells like marijuana in the car, or the officer says he or she smelled marijuana, which is their pretext. I smelled the faint odor of marijuana. Cops say that all the time when they offer it in Hawaii. In fact, the New York judge just slapped down the case on that basis. So if the marijuana is found in a common area, like in the back seat, in the trunk, you could be charged. That you either knew or should have known you had this contraband in your car. So that's about the only risk. So again, there is some passenger responsibility. And I think it would behoove the organization to communicate that to the people it provides these services to. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I mean, slim, you know, what's the chance, slim or none? I'd go with slim. Be unusual.
So, since you were offering your opinion, I thought I would ask, one of my thoughts is when I'm giving these, an individual a ride, or some individuals, winter's coming, and we're passing by all these secondhand stores, and, like they need coats.
Yeah.
And I'm like trying to weigh how much I should ask the sponsoring organization if we can add on, a shopping trip, with 2 or 3 individuals at a time on the way to and from a meeting, and how, my question is your opinion on how risky that is.
The more stops, the more exposure of people who some Vermonters believe don't belong here. The more likely it is there will be a phone call to somebody you don't want to get a phone call. These 3 Mexicans got busted going to Walmart in Derby. Somebody called. 20 years ago, we'd get a call shopping at Grand Union here, I think. It's a risk. My suggestion would be to do a coat drive. And at your meetings, have coats available and have people try one. The consular visits tend to be like that. There's a sharing of goods from the community that may be useful to this population. And the folks who come and enjoy the opportunity to visit with others. I'm sure you know about the isolation. One thing I haven't talked about, and this is Addison County, the land of milk and honey, right? H-2A is a legal status for seasonal farm workers, apple pickers, you have to make them, right? They come on legal status, they're short-term. If they overstay, they get out of status. But unfortunately, still and yet, there's no legal status for dairy workers because dairy work is the antithesis of seasonal. Twice a day, 365 days a year, correct? Sometimes 3 times. I said that to a farmer the other day, 3 times. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I carry with me in my car, in my car, pamphlets to hand out that have rights in Spanish and English. I don't always distribute those when I pick someone up, but they're in my car. And if I need one, or if I'm stopped, my inclination is to reach for one and hand it to the occupant of the car. Is that a bad idea? The other part of that question is, let's say I'm stopped and they're talking to me, and should I keep my mouth shut on all occasions, or should I say you don't have to answer that question or offer any kind of advice to the passenger?
Good question. So the first one's easy. You have a First Amendment right to free speech. There's nothing unlawful about you carrying literature or distributing literature. So that's the easy one. Instructing somebody not to cooperate with the officer's inquiry, if it's criminal, if they think your occupant is engaged in criminal activity, there's several potential crimes that they can charge you with. Impeding an officer or obstruction of justice, if they want to. Again, I would suggest that information be transmitted in a group before people at risk go in the car. Most officers will just tell you to shut up. I'm talking to him, not you. I would say there's some risk in that. But the best advice I can give to any citizen is you don't have to talk to police other than name, rank, and serial number. People dig themselves incredible holes by trying to talk their ways out of things when all they're doing is talking their way into more and more things and making it more challenging for a lawyer when they get to court. Because then you've got statements you've got to try to suppress because there was no basis for the stop. It gets less is more in that context. The less you say, the better. And I'm a firm believer. Like I say, if I get stopped, it's like, here you go. I'm not going to argue with you. Write me a ticket if you want to write me a ticket. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. So earlier somebody said, I can't communicate with my passenger.
Right.
I can communicate with my passengers.
I see that.
Yes.
Quite effectively.
Yeah, quite effectively. On TiVo.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So my question is, I'd rather that I talk to them rather than have some cop call Border Patrol.
Right.
So obviously I'd be filming anything that
Right.
takes place in the car or outside of it.
You'd be trying to film.
Or be trying to film.
Now, Border Patrol is very good about it. The first thing they said when they were stopping cars now, put your phone on
On the roof of the car. Okay, well that's a follow-up question because I thought that was the way to do that. But my original question was,
Generally, you have a right to record law enforcement doing their job. There was just a case of the Vermont Supreme Court 2 weeks ago. I'll get to that. A citizen in Burlington videoed a cop who he thought was using excessive force against a young black man.
oh yeah.
And wanted a copy of the video, and the Burlington Police Department said, sure, but we have to redact anyone else other than the suspect, and that's going to cost $3,000 in staff time. And the Supreme Court, on a 3-2 decision, which means it could go the other way next time, said no, Public Records Act applies, cops have to redact. But that's subject to change. And the videoing of police is perfectly legitimate. Okay. If they don't take your phone. Now, frankly, I don't know how they can take your phone. They do it. Border Patrols are known for that. Sorry, go ahead with your
Okay,
second.
I have a lot of questions about what you just said, but also, But also, is it better for me to just obviously I would just directly translate whatever the officer is saying to my passenger to my passenger, but the officer might not know that. So, I mean, is there anything I can do about that situation to try to mitigate that? Do you have any advice?
Well, you could suggest that the officer use a telephonic interpreter service. See, the problem with you interpreting, and it happens all the time in court, is that you either have or will be perceived to have a bias in favor of your passenger.
Obviously.
Right.
Obviously.
And it happens in family courts where, kids know English because they're going to school. Parents don't know English, so they use the kid as an interpreter in family matters, which is absurd.
Right.
Because there's personal interest. And Vermont, oddly enough, there's an oath when you interpret in court, you're going to do it verbatim, but there's no certification process. In the federal system, there is. Interpretation is a big problem. You could offer to interpret.
Is it better, understanding that it's a risk for me personally, but is it better for my passenger to say, we're in ? Vermont, there's no cell phone service, you can't call a telephonic interpreter. I would rather interpret for my passenger than have you call Border Patrol.
Or you could offer to go back to his station and use a telephone.
Okay.
Which
might be safer for everyone.
Might be, might not.
Okay.
Cops are trained to get the most they can out of a stop, but they get on the next stop. They're trying to make numbers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. So they want to clear and go on to the next one. They don't want to be taking people back. Including DUIs. It takes a lot of time to process somebody. So, but they do it.
Okay.
It's 2 hours off the road, at least. And then if you take them into custody, you got to drive them from here, they go to Rutland, I guess. So, there's more time.
Great. And then, if it's okay, can you expand on what you just said about the Border Patrol asking me to put the phone on the top of my car and recording?
That's the reports I'm getting.
Is that a legal thing for them to ask me to do? Do they have that power? Because it seems like that's the only way for me to safely record, literally, what is happening.
I think that was one of the elements in the Sandra Bland case. I think she got out of phone and the cop really. Again, you have a constitutional right to do it, but there is risk. The cops can overreact. I don't know how you tell. I think it raises real constitutional questions to confiscate a phone or take a phone away from an individual absent some legitimate reason, other than you don't want to be subjected to scrutiny, which, we're paying you to do the job right. Do it right. Have a record. I'm a big believer in body cameras. Of course, now the audios go off all the time at the critical moment, but at least there's a visual.
Maybe a solution is people buy dash cams.
Turn around. And dash cams all they do is record what's out there, and they don't record the vocal interaction between, it's on the cruiser, so if the stopped car is 100 feet ahead, all you're going to get is a visual of the cop at the window. Unless they turn on another mic on their body, you're not
Get a dash cam for her.
I mean, I have my own dash cam.
Yeah, but I like body cameras better because it's on the cop. The video camera only catches what's out there.
Yeah.
And the audio is often lost on the interaction the suspect window.
I'll leave it
Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Maybe that's what you should next fundraising mention. Buy an old cruiser and put the camera on. They sell them cheap. They go fast. These packages. Yeah, go ahead.
This is a follow-up to a couple of other questions ago. And this might be more of a question for Kathy and Veronica. When someone, a new worker, migrant worker, comes to Addison County, is there any way that they are, I don't know what the right word is, informed, initiated into what is legal and what's not legal, or is it just what they learn through the grapevine?
Great question.
No, go ahead.
Is that what we want? We want him to answer?
I always have the impression that migrant justice is doing work with the workers, and I feel ill-equipped to provide that.
Right.
So, but Billy Terrio,
Yeah. That's a good answer. Okay. Eva, ellos quieren que tú contestes esa pregunta. Estoy muy curiosa de ver si los nuevos trabajadores que apenas llegan aquí en Vermont, cómo ellos saben las leyes y cómo nosotros podemos organizar esta información para que ellos entiendan un poco más de sus derechos.
You don't have to answer that question. Only if you want to.
Solo llegan los trabajadores con sus familiares y a base de eso pueden dar un poco la información, o también Justicia Migrante anda visitando en los ranchos para enseñar los derechos.
So more or less everybody that comes here because they know somebody in their family that's already here, and those people can give advice, and also Migrant Justice does make regular farm visits to inform people of their rights.
How does that
What about migrant ed? They're limited because of politics, what they can say and not say, is my understanding.
It's also many people are working on the big farms, and there's a pretty significant grapevine and sharing information amongst the people that are, and the consular visits are also a really good time that people get oriented.
And my answer to that question would have been, it's somewhat dependent on the padre, the farm owner. You know, some are very kind and caring and treat their workers like family members, and some are not. So if you're concerned about the welfare of a family member, you're going to do your best to educate them to avoid getting scooped up and shipped away. So I don't know what Farm Bureau is doing these days. At one point they were pretty engaged. Nothing. You know, there are farmer organizations that groups like this could attempt to engage to assist in that process of educating their workers. Because farmers can't do it without these workers, by and large. That's my understanding. And it's getting more and more that way, is my understanding. Thank you for your answer, by the way, friend.
Could I ask two sort of related questions? You had mentioned that Phil Scott was interested in moving the legal border up to maybe 5 miles away.
Yeah.
Is there anything we can do to encourage him to take a much more public stand about that?
I think our congressional delegation said 25, to my memory. Sanders, Leahy, and Peter Welch. Scott can't do anything about it. I mean, it would require an act of Congress, is my understanding, to limit Border Patrol's broad jurisdiction. And I'm not seeing that happen. As long as Mitch McConnell's saying, if the president's not going to sign it, I'm not going to put it on the Senate floor. So what we need is a wholesale, what we need is a wholesale change in the federal government.
That would be
My political statement for the afternoon.
And the other question is, from your experience as a defender, when people are taken into custody and detained, what's the most, we write letters, we sign petitions, are there more effective, what other things should we be doing?
Well, if you're talking about ICE detention, it's not something I'm terribly familiar with, but Migrant Justice has done a good job of getting people bailed. You know, once you're detained and in removal proceedings, you can either voluntarily self-deport, or you can wait to have a hearing before an administrative law judge. And you have a right to have bail considered. Bail is a cash posting to ensure your appearance at a future event. So you can raise money, you can have a bail fund. That's happening more and more in the criminal justice system generally, where being a public defender, a $500 cash bail is the same as $50,000 for 90% of my clients. So 500 is doable, but they don't have 500. So, and I don't know the cash amounts for federal detention. You might check with somebody at Iron Justice either, or Manback or Rita Indio. They would be much better equipped, or an immigration lawyer, and there are a number in Burlington at this point. And other places, somebody's at Line Round's office, I think.
Can you recommend a good immigration lawyer that we could rely on?
I can give you a couple of names. Deb Volk does a bunch of it. Leslie Holman, they're both in Burlington. I think Andy Jackson down here has done some. He made a presentation at the last consular visit.
We've made contact with him.
Yeah.
We have contact with Andrew Jackson.
Is he interested?
He's very interested in working and helping. So Patricia and I met him at the Mexican consulate in Montpelier.
Yeah, that's where I hadn't heard the name for years. I'd never.
Right, and so he presented himself. He came to the consulate himself and said he was really interested in helping anybody who had housing issues or pay wage issues. I think he even said immigration was not his.
That's what he's.
Yeah, he said immigration was not necessarily his thing. I'll be totally honest. I tried to make contact with him, and he didn't respond to my phone calls. It's not to say he's not available, but it is to say he's very hard to reach. So he's available. He lives in Bristol. He's a really great local guy. Exactly. He's a really great local guy, but I'm not quite clear on how to directly reach him.
Most of the larger law firms in Vermont now have someone who's done immigration primarily on behalf of employers, because employers certainly have substantial risks. There's ICE raids, there are I-9 audits, on and on and on. So there's certainly a market for lawyers providing representation to employers. Of course, employers tend to have money to pay them. Less so for an undocumented worker who's in detention. So fundraising to pay somebody to do that work would certainly be a good thing, perhaps challenging, but a good thing. A bail fund would be a great idea. And we're here in a house of worship, and I know that clergy around the state have been pretty good on this issue. That's certainly a natural ally. Other questions, comments?
Yeah, a little bit. I wanted to ask my friend this, and I don't see him very often. But I'll get to my first question first. Can undocumented folks, I know many are able to get their driver's licenses and such.
Driver's privilege?
Yes, driver's privilege card. Is there such a thing as a non-driver privilege ID card?
Yes.
Is that a good idea for folks?
Same issue. There's a lot of people, particularly young people, who may not drive yet, but want to drink. DMV has always issued non-driving identification. I don't know what the fee is, but it's available. Okay. But again, you have to provide the same level of proof that you would. They're getting, after 9/11, after, what do they call those? Real ID. In order to get a license now, you have to have like a certified birth certificate. Now they're not, you don't walk out of a motor vehicle office anymore with a license. It gets mailed a week later from like a secret location because of identity fraud issues. So the same issues around, do you want to get yourself on a list that you have with driver privilege cards, I would think you'd have with non-driving identification, particularly if you have a Spanish-sounding surname.
And my other question is, I know a farm worker, and I've known him for years, but I don't ask such questions. And he was talking with, at a meeting with a farm worker, and I wish I knew Spanish because I missed his advice, but the question was, you have a green card, You swam across the Rio Grande. You've been in Vermont here 10 years. I've been in Vermont here 5 or 6 years. They've, so I know the question was, okay, how did you get your green card? Because I would like a green card as well, but they were speaking in Spanish and I didn't quite get my friend's answer. Is there any advice you would give on folks that, you know, I want to be here, I want to stay here?
Turn the clock back 10 years.
What's that?
Turn the clock back 10 years.